whether some other issues have come up, and I guess kind of just sort of bash out a few things that maybe we've already discussed a little bit in one or two people on a GitHub issue, and maybe some people haven't been paying attention to that, or maybe something that's come up and people want to just kind of review. So this might be a short meeting. It might be quite a long meeting. We'll see. So basically, does anybody have anything they immediately want to share, either their progress or something they sort of prototyped that they want some feedback on, or something along those lines? And I'm kind of envisaging this can be a chat, or you can share your screen and show a little code example or something along those lines. If not, then I will lead with what I've been working on, which is not particularly groundbreaking stuff, but yes, I'll do this, and then we'll see what happens after that. So yeah, I took issue, I think it was 59, called "Don't Test Flags Not Relevant for Internal Functions." So I guess you can go and find that. It's only had me comment on it so far. So let me share my screen if I can figure out how to do that and show you what I've been working on. How do I share my screen? Here we go. So hopefully you guys can see my RStudio window. Is that correct?
I cannot, not yet.
No?
Neither.
All right, let's try sharing the whole screen and see what happens. I'll work out how to stop doing this either now. Well, I think I might have crashed the web app because I have no interaction with any of the buttons anymore.
I could try stealing it, and then you can try stealing it back.
Yeah, give that a whirl.
Is my screen sharing?
So I still just see a message which says begin screen sharing, but there's no OK button.
Yeah, well, I have nothing to share, so. Or, well, you could if I needed to, but that is weird. How do you stop screen sharing?
Is that are you seeing my screen or no?
Yes.
Yes.
Something.
Yeah.
I wonder if the permissions don't allow Mike to. Did you want to show work that you'd been doing, Mike, so it's just on your computer?
I kind of wanted to step through an example of what I've done and then have some questions about unit test.
Have you committed it to a GitHub repository? And I could navigate to it, or?
Yes.
Okay. All right, here I am. I guess I want to go to this issue. And I guess you forked the repository?
Yep. I think Konstantin just posted a link in the chat.
Okay. I don't know how to find the chat now that I'm. But maybe sorry, I can't find. I don't know where the chat is. So.
Okay, if you go to pull requests, what's up there?
Pull requests. So this is your repository?
Yeah, it is. I guess the pull request would be nice because it would just show the changes I made, right?
Yeah.
Maybe you need to go back to the original repository.
Back to the original. I see. So you've got a pull request on the issue, which is conveniently right at the bottom here. Oh, but you said there's a pull request here, right? That's the issue. This is the pull request. Don't run, don't check. Right. All right. And then this is what you've done.
Yeah, I think there's a little lag because I'm still looking. There we go. Right, it's loaded. And then I guess if you go to the files changed.
Files changed, yes.
So maybe one thing we can discuss maybe after this is that those first two changes there, which I imagine we've all made exactly the same changes, description and news.
Yeah.
And there'll probably be some interesting conflicts coming up from that. But yeah, I guess it's the checks and hang on, let me find my own version of this. Yeah, so it's changes to checks.r and I guess I added some extra files as well. So I guess the context of this issue, right, is that some man pages are flagged with don't run or don't test in the example code, which is okay, but if it gets noted by BioC check, and if more than I think it's 20% of the examples have this flag in it, then you'll get a note printed out to screen saying you're using this too much and it should have working examples, please don't do it. And I think it's Marcel posted this issue, which was basically saying if you've written a man page and then you tag it with this internal keyword, I don't think it should be counted in this equation, right? If the only places where this happens are things which are internal man pages, it shouldn't be a note. So it's I guess it's a very small subset of places this happens, but this seemed like a relatively straightforward thing to detect. But it opened quite a few things that I didn't really know about. So I didn't know what this internal keyword even was until I looked into this. So I guess if you scroll down ever so slightly more, Martin, to show the internal RD file. So the important bit here, the keyword, is the very last line in that, right, which goes in that keyword tag. And when this is present in a man page, the man page gets built, and there is an RD file. You've either written it out by hand or you put this in Roxygen. It will build the RD file, but it doesn't appear in the index of the help when you look at the index for the package or something in the HTML help or something, and nor can you do question mark and then the name of this function and find the man page. So it produces a file that you could browse to if you really want to, but it doesn't produce useful help to a kind of user. You really have to dig for it. There doesn't seem to be much documentation about this, but the internal seems to be, but if you want to write help for a developer who will use a function but you don't want to necessarily make it available to your users. So I'd never looked into this before, but this exists, right? So quite often, I guess if I have things that I'm not exporting to someone, I don't write any man page for it at all. So maybe this is actually a useful thing to have, right? Where you write something that's useful for you or another developer, but not for your users. But it probably, and then I'm conflicted. Should the examples work or not, right? If it's actually useful for another developer, it's probably still good to have an example that runs. But maybe you're deliberately writing something that's broken for these kinds of internal things. It doesn't matter quite so much for your end users, and it's probably a niche thing. So I'm a bit conflicted. But that's kind of my overview of what the internal keyword does. And then I guess I wrote some code which picks that out and is kind of bolted into the bit which already detected. So this checks.r, you can't see the whole function here. I guess you can see the name of it right at the top there, the check usage of don't. This essentially just looks for if you use either of these things and counts how many times it appears. And then I basically negate that if I find the keyword internal. So that's what this is doing, which I think addresses the issue. I'm not entirely sure whether it's something we should be doing or not, particularly because you can use export with the internal keyword. So you can make the function available, but with no man page, which seems like a slightly strange situation, but it is possible. But anyway, that's what my check here is doing, and I think it works. But to test it works, I put in a unit test. So I guess if you scroll down, Martin, so this is the unit test, and this is, so I asked some questions in Slack, because what I wanted to do was I made that new internal RD file and I put it in one of the example packages that distributed BioC check, the really small package skeletons, just to, and there are already some man pages in there that will trigger this error, so you will get the note and it will test that the note works. And I basically wanted to check that my new man page with the internal flag was not being counted. So I kind of wanted to check the percentage of files that gets printed out, right? It prints out and says 25% of your files are doing this, or 70% of your files are doing this, or whatever. And I wanted to check that my specific file was not being included in that. So I've ended up using this, I guess, the third line of the function is capture output. Because whilst the infrastructure in BioC Check at the moment allows you to count the number of notes, I want there to be a note, but I don't want this particular file to be triggering it, which is kind of a weird position to be in, right? I want actually the content. And at the moment, we don't record the content of the message, only that there was a message at all. So what I do here is capture this and then check basically for the percentage that gets printed out is the same. Does that percentage I'm expecting appear in there? So this check true, and then there's a grep for 67%. So I guess one thing I wanted to know is, does this seem like a really fragile? Is this actually a sensible thing to be doing? Or maybe, like, does anyone have an opinion on whether this is too fragile?
Mike, I didn't quite understand. Why do you still expect there to be a node? So is it because there still are tests or not enough tests, or what is the problem?
So, okay, so what I've actually done is kind of a workaround here to hack this. But initially, so before I did any work, this test package test package 0 has 3 man pages, and 2 of them have don't run in. So you get 2/3 of the pages have don't run, and you get that triggers the note. And I wanted to add one new man page that has internal, so shouldn't be counted. So now there's 4 man pages, 2 of them should still trigger the note, but my new one shouldn't be detected, right? Like, that's the idea. So I kind of know a note should be triggered, but the number of files should now only be 2 out of 4 instead of 2 out of 3, which is kind of a weird case. So what I've actually ended up doing is putting it into test package 1 that has no man pages at all at the moment, and my pull request adds 1, and then it just says, yes, the note, it says the note wasn't thrown because there's this one internal man page, which is kind of a workaround, but I feel like there might be other places where knowing the content of the message that's written useful. And so this was my kind of framework for getting hold of that context. But yeah, I wondered whether actually grepping for specific percentages or something like that would be considered too fragile, because all it needs is one person to put another man page in there, and then this does. You keep having to constantly update your test.
And would have been an option to just create a new package so that, like, one which is only for your specific use case? Do you know what's happening?
Yeah, so I guess that's actually what I did in the end, was kind of hijacked one of the existing ones that didn't have any manual pages. So I didn't look at what this test package 1, where in the checks that's used, but it's not used to check the man pages. So I kind of just piggybacked on that and put in and maybe that works fine, but I guess as a broader statement, I feel like there's potential for wanting to know what's in the message. But maybe there's not. Maybe I just happened to stumble across that in this one example and nobody else would give a crap.
To me, it seems fragile, yes. And then if I were just, there's lots of interesting things here. And one thing I was wondering about, without really being able to, operationalize it or something like that, is that I guess that this function, this check usage of don't, takes as input this package directory. And so the way the function is written is that it expects, the way that you have to test it is by invoking it with a package. But if you'd sort of refactored the function so that there was like a check usage of don't in man page, and you pointed it to a file or even just the content of a file, then you could check, there's sort of two levels of check. One is like, does the code that you've written actually work? And then the other is, does the when you trigger a note or a warning or an error, does it percolate up to the user in a useful way? And I guess what you really want to do here is check whether your code actually parses the man page correctly, not really the percolating up to the user. That's somebody else's job to test. And your unit test is basically at the top level, like I don't know if you'd call it an integration test, but the feature that you're interested in is really only one part of what gets tested here. And then
it's kind of a byproduct of what I'm doing. Yeah.
So I guess I was wondering, and I'm not sure whether this is completely satisfactory or not, but if this were refactored so that there was a check usage of don't, and it called a helper function, check usage of don't in man page or something like that, whether that would, or in man pages, whether you could feed the function that you wanted, that you're going to, most of this code would be in that helper function, and the argument to that would be like a vector of paths to man pages or to the man directory, and then your test file doesn't have to be incorporated into into a package, and the result of the function is probably what you test, 67%, and then you have full control over that.
Yeah, because I guess you can't quite see it here, but about 2 lines above that, there's this is actually just iterating over a vector of man pages inside. So the DX in seek along man pages part, it's just iterating along the vector of man pages in the package, checking whether they have an example, then if they have don't run, and then sort of negating that if it finds the internal keyword. That whole loop could be turned into a separate function.
Yeah, and it would just take like these lines here would be what was left in the body, basically, of check usage of don't.
Yep. Yeah. And then I think my my testing infrastructure would then be better. So maybe this does want to be refactored.
Yeah. I actually think that that's like as I've sort of, become more confident or thinking about writing unit tests, it's actually a kind of a pattern that I think, like, this function has become conceptually complicated, and then refactoring it actually helps you to focus on, like, when you're modifying this function, you didn't have to pay any attention to this stuff up here and maybe stuff down below as well. So refactoring it to have just the thought that you're trying to modify seems like a win also in sort of developing the code as well, not just testing it.
And I guess this then touches on the topic of when it's not your code, how comfortable are you refactoring somebody else's function, right? And that's definitely something that I think this experience, this whole hackathon thing, is quite an interesting way of touching upon. Because I don't really know about most people, but most of the time I work on my software and not many other people have access to it. You know, you might get the occasional pull request or something, but most of the time it's mine, and I might contribute a very small change to somebody else's code as well. But similarly, I wouldn't rewrite all of their code. And I think this is quite an interesting part of this kind of experiment. We're all collaborating on a big piece of collaborative software. And so has anybody else sort of done something more major than this, or did you kind of, everybody, I approached this with the, I'm going to make the smallest number of changes necessary, tick the box, essentially. Which might not be the best approach, but maybe it's the most conservative. So did anybody else have a different attitude to this?
I mean, I like that you're communicating your concerns, right? And I feel like this exercise, in this BioC-Check-a-thon exercise, is showing this in many ways, right? Like, I've seen in other people's repos that are way more active that they ask for people to submit an issue where they propose the pull request before actually sending one. They don't like getting pull requests out of random type of thing, and so we created the issues. We've tried to have a bit of discussion, right? But like in my case, I worked on 3 small pull requests, and then one of them I ended up discarding it because the maintainers were not as interested in the idea. But like, I mean, that's fair, right? It's just that like we're all trying to be really nice and can feel a bit weird because like the answers were like, oh, we're not interested in this, but like no one actually closed the issue, right? So I was like, okay, I'm gonna close it because this is the appropriate thing to do now, right? And from the other side, I imagine the maintainers are like, oh, we want people to contribute, right? We don't want to feel like we're suppressing contributions from the community. So that was a bit, I don't know, that's like a new experience for me, right? Also, and like communication is like, I guess, the key in the end, right? And like, just how do you foster that communication?
How does it work within the core team itself? Do you each have individual sort of packages you're assigned to, and there's not that much overlap between the work? I mean, I guess I could go and look at the pull, the issues and commits here, but is that sort of how it's structured?
So
anybody other than?
I'll just say
something.
So I sent in a pull request about something which bothers me, and I am a core team member. That doesn't necessarily mean that the people who actually maintain the BioC check repo, Lori and Martin, actually like my idea. So if I don't know who's sharing the screen, but if they can navigate to the pull requests and open up the pull request I submitted, I thought it was a pretty straightforward change, and Martin gave me a pretty relevant comment, and I agree with him, right? I don't think there is ever a pull request which is denied for no reason. That's what I was trying to get at, I guess. Like, I don't think and even if this pull request doesn't go through, I wouldn't be disappointed, right? Because at least now I know why it didn't go through. That's part of the learning experience. And I've had other pull requests like rejected or just waiting in the queue forever, and I don't know if that should be taken as discouraging. I think it's just part of how the social coding experience works, and that's pretty much it.
Yeah, we try.
I guess Sorry, go on, Lauren.
Oh no, I was just gonna say too, just to pick off that, like, I guess to answer your question a little bit too, like, as members of the core team, I think we all kind of have our pet packages that we've kind of taken on, and then as a level of respect to our teammates, we would never like push to someone's kind of pet package, we would put in a pull request or create a branch for them to look at. So that kind of leans on to what Nitesh was saying of like, we even sometimes can sit in the queue while we wait for someone to review our own, even if we think it's a good idea. So.
Yeah, because I think it's a really interesting aspect of this, right? It's this kind of, I guess you guys have a closer programming relationship than there's kind of the core team, and there's one person who maintains the package, then there's people who are somehow a bit more associated with it, and then I guess the other half of us on this call or contributing to this are like one step out. We might use the tool, but we aren't intimately familiar with it or necessarily feel like we can make large scale changes. I quite like Leonardo's suggestion that actually you, in some, I guess we did this with the issues, but you raise a suggestion or a question or something along those lines before ever writing any code. And I think that's been, like it's been quite nice, I think, to have a list almost, even if the list was mostly generated from you guys, of like, these are things we want to work on, but we don't have the time to work on. I think that's been really quite a helpful thing for if, like, some of us have lots of time this week, some of us don't have much time this week, that you pick a beginner thing or a more advanced thing. I think, I'm not sure how much productivity we're going to have this week. I'd be interested to know, like, how many of these are going to get merged in, right? Because there was definitely a learning curve at the beginning where I was just scrolling through files and trying to work out how things went. And whilst Laurie's intro was really helpful and in orientating me a bit, it still took a while to figure out what needed to be changed and what existed in the package already. And that's also a different mentality to like something that you're intimately familiar with and you work with. And whenever I open my RStudio sessions, I know what file most of the time I know what file I'm looking for when I'm going to make a change. So it will be interesting to know how this how much from 1 week gets contributed, and maybe we should agree to look at this again in a month or something along those lines. But I've really enjoyed this aspect of having the prep meeting and talking about things and issues and stuff on GitHub. So I don't know if anybody else has, I don't know, things they would change about this process or stuff they've really benefited from already.
Yeah, so like I think like other repos where people don't have a hackathon, right, experience, they have a contributing MD file, right, that outlists some of the things that maintainers would be interested in making sure that pull requests or something like that pass, right? So one of my pull requests was like a template for when you submit a pull request, just to make sure that you ran some of the tests from Lori that she mentioned. But maybe that needs to be expanded a bit, because maybe like it's like, oh, you shouldn't like modify, for example, the version number, right? Let us modify that version number. Like by us, I mean the maintainers, right? Or things like that like, it's like small pieces of pain that you don't want to deal with, or like if let's say the BioC check maintainers use a specific package for automatically formatting the code, it could be like, oh, you have to run this line of code to automatically format everything before you send the PR, right? That's what I've seen in other people's repos. But I mean, for me, like, I mean, I know all of you, right? But like, or most of you, I know you in person. But like, let's say even if I didn't know you, I really like the quick review comments. I found them, they were like clear and helpful, right? So maybe later on, if there's a particular issue that maintainers really like, maybe you can highlight it in these template files or something, and be like, this is like the ideal interaction we want, right? Or something like that.
Yeah, I feel like we're learning how to run a hackathon as we are contributing to things, right? Like I've not really been involved in something like this before, and I think you're adding the kind of pull request template and things was actually a really nice idea, and that will make things easier in some sense going forward, right? It's one more thing that helps orientate people that are going to contribute to things. I certainly don't have that in place in any of the GitHub things I have, and if I get a pull request, it can be very mixed on those. I don't get too many, but perhaps this is also something that we should think about as developers, right? It's clearly sometimes that's helpful to make people stop and tick those boxes, just like you do when you submit a package to be considered for in the contributions thing to Bioconductor, right? You have to tick all those boxes, and if you don't tick them all, you can't submit the first issue, kind of thing. And so maybe stopping people to pause and think about it is actually a really helpful thing.
Something else.
Sorry?
Sorry, Mike. Something else I was thinking is like on the issue where people discuss a potential idea, right? Something that I find myself is that it can be really hard to know what are all the code files that are linked to a particular issue. Because maybe, I mean, what I end up doing sometimes is I search the name of a particular function, let's say, or a particular text message, and then I find that function, and I think I've edited the things that are related to it, but maybe I'm missing, right, a code in other files. So that can be sometimes useful to, like, from the maintainer saying like, oh, I think you might have to edit, X, Y, and Z file, right? And that can really help, like get like complete pull requests, right? Because you're like, oh, okay, now I know where I need to try to edit things, right?
So I just wanted to add, like, all of these feedback comments are super helpful, right? Because I'm hoping that we run something like this again. But there's one fundamental difference between like an in-person hackathon and an online one, like, is that we're not doing this in the same room, or like we're not sitting on a Zoom call for like 5 hours each day and just leaving ourselves on mute and just talking through our issues. And that could potentially help if we were all on the same call, just muted and working. And if somebody has an issue, like, they would just pop up and like, hey, I'm working on this. What files do I need to edit? And the expert who is working on that package day in and day out can just chip in and say, oh, you need to edit the checks.r file. And there's this function which needs that. Just something to like put you in the right path and like save you like an hour,
Yeah, so I deliberately tried to ask some questions in Slack because my typical workflow would be to sit down with the source code and really try to understand it myself, right? Like, just basically read it like a book in some sense and map it out. And that's not very collaborative or particularly quick and effective. And so I was deliberately forcing myself to go and ask, like, surely somebody knows this question and can answer it quicker than I can figure it out, right? Which isn't normally the way I work. But I was really trying to embrace the kind of collaborative bit of this by asking. And then you realize you're formulating the question in a really weird way, or it doesn't actually make any sense, and that's you have to come back. But I think that is another aspect of this. I completely agree. If we were all sat in the same room, it would be easier to talk about things. I like your working through our issues sounds like therapy, and I'm not sure if this is therapy or not. But that's not. I mean, it's not possible for many reasons. But I think, for instance, Slack is really helpful, right? It's much more interactive than email ever is. And maybe it's not quite as good as having a Zoom call, but I can't imagine being on a 24-hour Bioconductor Zoom call for 7 days or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, I've struggled personally with like the text-based communication a bit on the issues of like I know everyone is being succinct, right? Like, and like and I myself sometimes hesitate whether like my messages are sounding friendly or they're not sounding friendly at all, right? And then I'm like, I don't know, that concerns me. And it's easier to do it through video or something.
So one specific question then I have for everyone is, so I think we've mentioned the description and the news files a few times. Did we come to a consensus that we kind of wouldn't bump the version number, or I think we should definitely write what we've done in the news file, but maybe not follow the convention where we put a specific version number next to each bullet point kind of thing, because nobody's going to know in advance which version number they get, right? So perhaps we should put everything under it.
I think that's fair. We don't bump the version number. We just add our fixes in the news file, and whenever somebody from the team merges the pull request, like we somehow collate everything that happened, all the pull requests which were merged during the hackathon, and then we bump the version at the very end just once and say, hey, these are all the fixes which went through after like we do our testing and checking and stuff. That's my opinion, but there could be different ones.
Yeah, I'm kind of on that agreement too. Didn't really think about that at the start, but it would make sense to just put in your entry in the news file without the version and version number, and then either, as Natasha said, collated under a BioC hackathon thing, or when the person merges it, if it wasn't in a hackathon setting, when the core team kind of merges it over, if there's other corrections or other conflicting pull requests at the time from the community, they can adjust the news file to reflect the version if necessary.
Yeah. This is not strictly related to the hackathon, but like I'm thinking it would be nice to have some type of blog on the website, because I really like the blog post from the RLeap team, where they actually have a function that looks at a GitHub repo and finds all the GitHub usernames of people that have contributed in X amount of time, and then they list them on their blog post of like, oh, version so and so of X package, and like they list all the people that that helped, right? And so I think that, I mean, at least for me, it feels really it feels great if you see your name there, right? Even if you only like reported a bug, right? Let's say. So maybe that could be something we could try to do at the end of this hackathon, or it doesn't have to be the full blog yet or anything, but and maybe that's more of the community advisory discussion topic. But I like that.
No, I think that's fair. Yeah. My own personal perspective is following the convention and stuff. I mean, if you're putting in a brand new check that helps us out, I would not be opposed to putting a contribution in even the description file. But I think it was Marcel that pointed out to like adding a username or a note in the news file when you either submit a pull request to us, or if it's a bug fix request, we should get, we core team in general, whoever is fixing community package should get better about giving at least a shout out somewhere to, hey, thanks for pointing this out to us.
I guess that's
I'm normally happy if. Sorry, go on, Martin.
Nope. Go ahead, Mike.
I was going to say I'm normally happy if my GitHub avatar appears like in the list of contributors on the sort of title page of a package or something. So I'm disappointed if I submit a pull request and then they copy and paste the work and put it in themselves. But if you merge it and then it adds me as a very small contributor, that's I'm happy with that. Just to see my face appear next to more and more things, that satisfies my ego.
And I'll say when I try to do pull requests from the community and the core team, I do the command line arguments that do keep the log commits and everything from the contributors. So I tried to make a conscious effort to do that personally. But yeah.
I guess I was thinking that GitHub does actually allow you to track who's actually made contributions, and that's something that we could harvest in our release announcements, for instance. Not quite a blog post, but summarizing contributions to each package as part of the news from new and existing software packages. We could have a little collation of committers during the last X period of time, during the last release.
So that would
Sounds like a great pull request.
That would be to git.bioconductor?
Yeah, but I guess when you push changes from GitHub to git.bioconductor.org, the commit log still has all of the commit history. So
yeah, I wasn't sure if you were focusing only on core packages here or on packages in general, right? I mean, I guess a lot of the packages, it would be one person has committed because they're the maintainer, and some would be no commits have been made except Nitesh bumping the version numbers or something, right?
Yeah, yeah. We'd have to filter out Nitesh's.
No commits for Nitesh. That's sad.
If we have a bit of time, I was just thinking that it could be nice to go through one of the open issues for the BioC check that doesn't have anyone assigned to it yet, that you're interested in having us work on, and then just maybe explain to us a bit like, oh, these maybe are the potential challenges for making this issue or something like that, right? I mean, that's just an idea. It's just
we could also look, so the one that I started, I think, turned out to be a little more difficult than I initially expected. So that was the trying to give people the advice to check stuff on Experimental Hub if they have large files. And in particular, there was this issue with the mock the functions. So again, there was a problem that the way that the code is structured, or that I set it, it's the package directory that makes it quite difficult to somehow trying to avoid creating. I haven't created an issue and pull request yet, Martin. It's let me check. If you go to 67, issue 67 should be mine.
Yeah.
And then there's a link to the commit somewhere at the bottom.
Lots of discussion.
So first of all, thank you all for the input that you gave. Sorry that I didn't have time yet to give it another try, but it's probably it might be reasonable to advise people to put the large files onto the experiment hub. So I basically, to design this, I looked at the already existing check, which if there are files larger than 5 megabytes, and then copied this with a specific subsetting if they are in the data folder. Previous step, and the second issue was that to actually have like a positive example for my unit tests, I had the issue that it's difficult because, well, we don't want to store like a large file, but there isn't an easy way to do mocking, like the file.size, file.info function with the runit package. So I just created one on the fly, but Laurie advised that this is probably not the best idea because this would be a strain on the temporary directory on the builders. So the question would be, how would we solve this problem, or how would we do a test if we stick with this structure of the check large files, or maybe better name for the function, but if we stick with the structure, it also needs to be refactored more thoroughly so we can extract the specific functionality that we care about.
Again, I was wondering actually for this one, so there's actually this max size here, which is hard coded in the package itself, and I was wondering if I guess it's kind of along the same lines as with Mike Smith, where if that were instead an argument to the check large files function that had a default of 5 megabytes, say. And maybe a little bit more refactoring so that like the stuff in this chunk of code, which is like where you're doing the work, if it were a helper function itself, like check large files in software or something like that, and it took file paths and the max size argument, then it'd be really straightforward to create a temporary directory and stick a file of size 10 bytes in there and have it pass, and then add another file of 20 bytes and set the max file size of 15, and then it would fail. And that'd be a reasonable test instead of the maybe a reasonable test without having to actually create a 5 megabyte file. And also having to create a whole package.
You could also, if I can add my 2 cents, you can also create a helper function that gives you the return value of the size of all the files in that data directory, so that you can just mock that instead and see if your tests show up, or your message warnings show up.
Yes, I think those are both good ideas. Actually, I really like the second idea for mocking, just wrapping it myself. This is quite an easy solution to work around this, that there isn't no direct way to support it. I also like the way that Martin suggested to more thoroughly refactor. I guess one problem with this might be that like all the different checks in this checks.r file are structured. We have this one check which takes a package directory and then which does all the work. It would be kind of breaking with consistency, which can again make it more difficult, even if the one function itself might be easier to test than. So I guess that's the trade-off there.
It sounds like we're going to refactor at least two of the checks, right? So, and maybe, I mean, we're talking about refactoring something inside these, right? So the kind of, I guess you've written a whole new function here, whereas I added a few bits, check, don't, or whatever the function was called. But we're kind of, the API is sort of staying the same, and we're talking about refactoring the internals. So maybe you can do that piece by piece, right? Like there's still a function that will take a package directory, but internally it's going to call something that takes the list of, in this case, file sizes, I guess is what you're sort of you're talking about, taking a vector of file sizes and then throwing the warning if one of them fails. I think that's the second approach that was proposed. So maybe this isn't, it's kind of refactoring the internals, but it's not like completely tearing up and making a new check that's wildly different to what's in there. At least the outside interface is not that different. But maybe we'll learn that after we've made a few changes to our respective checks and seen how far they diverge from what else remains. So we've still got about 10 minutes. So do you want to go back to Leonardo's idea and pick one of the ones that's also nobody's been assigned to, and then maybe we'll just talk through that? I don't know if anybody tried there was the two which kind of might require much packages from outside. So there's the lint R and the cover, like those kind of proposals, which I don't know if anybody's tried to do anything with those. Or I think there was a bit of chatter about how cover will actually take twice as long to run a package. So I don't know whether anybody has anything more to add on those two. But if not, maybe let's go through one that nobody's been assigned to and see if any of us can be excited about it.
I think the scholarly attributions one, that sounds like something which is going to be helpful to a lot of people in the community, especially coming from academic backgrounds. I'm sorry, go ahead, Laurie.
Sorry, I didn't realize I wasn't on mute. Continue.
Well, I think Martin said he wanted to work on this one, right?
Yeah.
So have you worked on it, Martin?
No. I've kind of explored it. Like I didn't know about this. You can say role is a funding role, and then it actually prints out, or you can use that to document. So it says on SC merge, you can see here's the funder showing up in the authors field, and not in the citation field, which I think maybe this wasn't automatically generated. Yeah. So, and then I guess the other thing. So funding is one, and then the ORCID ID was a second ID, and it was also related to this one, I guess, this issue as well, which there's kind of like a consolidation of issues that could maybe be beneficial.
Also the one by Adin, or how do you pronounce her name? Adin?
Adin. Was that the one about geographical location?
Yes.
Yes.
In addition to like Twitter handles or I guess other social media identifiers kind of thing, like in addition to ORCID. I've no idea whether there's scope for those kinds of things in authors at R or whatever the construction is.
I will mention too, it's a beginner issue, and I don't foresee it being too hard and semi-straightforward, the citation check. So as Martin went to that landing page, we have a check in the daily builder where if the citation file isn't formatted correctly, that it will now print a warning that it's not formatted correctly. But we don't actually check this currently in incoming packages. So it should be a straightforward check that if a citation file is present to see if it's formatted correctly.
So that read citation file function, that basically does the test, right? Is that correct? Like it will return fail if the formatting is not valid.
Yeah, I can't remember exactly what the output is, but it yes.
Okay, so really we just need a test that identifies if a citation file exists and then runs that on it and gives back whether it was successful or not. That summarized it?
Yes. I guess the tricky part that I guess I didn't think about is it might have to go in the BioC check get clone. Because it has to be performed on the raw file before the package is installed in the R session. Maybe. There was some caveat of like it has to work, the read citation file has to work on just the raw file without the package actually being installed. But I think that should be okay because you could still test the read of that function without it.
This sounds like a good example where maybe you can add that extra information to the issue, and then I'll claim the issue and see if I can work from it. I think it does sound doable, but that extra help is definitely going to be useful, right? I would not look in the get the check from Git version. So if you could add that, Laurie, then I'll claim the issue afterwards.
Sounds good.
Cool.
Laurie, can you tell us a little bit about the intermediate one about news file formatting? I'm a bit curious on that one.
Sure, because we put a check in the news file, and it should be checking for poorly formatted news files, but I don't think it actually always picks it up. And I think this is another one where it might have to switch locations, because someone was pointing out, oh, it needs to take into account if it's an MD file, which if you look in the actual check.r code, we do. I think it also depends on if it's being checked as the R function versus R command install, because what we found out collating the news files for the release announcement is that I think once it could be, I can't remember if it's just unique of the way that we collect news files for packages that have news files, or if it's a symptom of just how R handles it. But when a package is built and checked, the news file might actually lose its extension. So if you're checking the news file like after from like a built tarball that's untarred, it may not have the actual extension anymore that it was originally sent in as. So
but then what is the value formatting? Like, is there a function that's a part of that needs to be implemented, right? A function that checks a specific format?
Yeah, so I mean, it should.
Or what is a poorly formatted news file? I don't know.
Some files will cause or will not have, when it gets read into the check. I think I have a reference to the check.r file somewhere in there, Martin, if you want to. But based on the file extension, it gets read in with 3 base, either like read MD or read RD. Yeah, if you could open that link to that code section there.
Actually, I'm having a tough time. My connection seems terrible, so I'm only hearing fragments of the conversation.
That's good. Code that we use when we collate too. So these are functions like built into R to read the news file. Old-time.rd manual LaTeX version, MD version, or a default. I hate to say plain text file because it's not a plain text file. We hate saying that because it's not a plain text file. But if you do like help.news, it explains like this news file that it can't be plain text. You can't just have like floating text. They have to be like specific header with lists. Functions, depending on the extension, should read it in, and if it read in properly, should produce output that looks like almost an MD file output. And it will either be blank if it didn't read properly, or it will have like this weird text output that just says like text colon something, text colon something, text colon something, instead of actually formatting the news file.
Would it help to have some examples of files that aren't being caught by the current code?
Sure, I'll have to find some because I think it was kind of like the in passing people pointed out of, oh, I have it and it's not showing up. So then we go back and I find out that it's not properly formatted and then that it didn't catch it. But I can look for some and post to follow up.
That's good. Thank you. Thank you for the explanation.
Hopefully that made sense. If you need more or want more discussion on it, just I guess post to the issue and we can work through it.
I like the comment in there, the fix me, find a good reference, because I completely agree. I never know how to format a use file or know where to go. I just go and find one that I've written before and copy paste it in and hope for the best. Because they currently work and that seems to be okay, but I don't know what the format is or reference for it or anything. I find them a very strange format. So yeah. I'll be interested if anyone can fix me and put in a good link there. That'd be fun. I think we could all read that. That's probably a topic for a Devel forum in the future.
I just wanted to point out, sorry, just in the vignette, it's interesting that this hasn't come up, and maybe it says something about vignettes being good in principle but not in practice. But the way the package was originally written was that the vignette contains detailed explanations of each of the checks and how they can be resolved. And yet when we've been talking about this, all of the issues, none of us have mentioned adding to the vignette to explain how the user is supposed to interpret their result and what they should do about it. And I guess I was thinking about the fix me and how the reference, the notes and warnings should all say, check out the vignette for an explanation of what to do. And then the vignette should go into, because you have much more latitude here to go on for paragraphs about the nuances of whatever the issue is. I mean, in principle.
And I guess this is good that it's open because I didn't actually show it in the presentation on Monday, but I mentioned it in passing. But if you look through there, all of those like boldface section headers, they do reference a check in the package, and that's where I was talking about if you took all of those boldfaces out, you would get your BioC check. So like if all those boldface headers would be the output if you ran BioC check in as the function or our command BioC check.
Interesting.
That is really interesting because I don't think I would look in the vignette. It makes sense now we talk about it, but basically I expect the instructions to be printed out in the message that's telling me that I've done things badly. I don't know if there would be a way of, and I would also get annoyed if there was like 15 things each just repeated look in the vignette, right? So I guess I might go and do it, but that would be a very strange message. But I wonder if it would be possible to link to the correct section in the vignette or something like that from an issue. I don't know whether that would also be really fragile and you wouldn't be able to work it out on different systems, but I might follow links in the sort of summary at the bottom to look at the specific section in more detail. But yeah, I'm not sure I've ever looked at the vignette for BioC check.
Isn't that weird?
Nobody else is admitting to this, so maybe that's just my problem rather than a universal one.
That's not true. I haven't read the vignette for BioC check.
Oh, my documentation wasted. All my good documentation wasted.
But I'm not sure it's actually necessary that you specifically look into the vignette. It can also just be something that comes up when you Google for the error. Because I know, for example, with the normal RCMD check, I often land on the Hadley Wickham R package books, which has one whole chapter on all the different warnings and notes that you can get there, giving a little more detail what you can do to fix them. So I would assume that if you actually Google for the errors that you get from the BioC check, you might also just get a link to the vignette of BioC check, and you can learn more about it. I don't think yet you need to consciously look it up there.
Probably for that, you need to include an actual full error on the vignette, People copy paste the full error message.
Right.
Or like it was just mentioned, maybe even referencing the vignette either in the summary section at the end or the top. Like we say in the top, like it's still like we can change the warnings and it's a work in progress. Or at the end when we print out the summary of if you want more detail, we highly suggest going to the vignette.
It's a very passive-aggressive error message if we just tell them to Google it. So it's a fine line. We all know it's what we would do, but I'm not sure I want to actually write that in the how you should solve the problem.
No, the link to the vignette. It's like this.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So I've really enjoyed this. It's been a bit more freestyle, but hopefully we've all got something out of today's session. Yeah, I have to run now, so it can't run on too much longer. I'm happy to let people discuss more issues if they want to. If not, thanks for attending. And then tomorrow is another Zoom, what are we using here? Blue Jeans call as a kind of wrap up for this hackathon week. So that's 1 hour earlier than this call. I don't want to say any time zones because I'll just get them wrong, but it's 1 hour earlier than this call was. So I don't know if Laurie, you want to add anything more about tomorrow's session or anything?
No, it was going to be kind of the same kind of format. I didn't have anything in particular, but I used for people to discuss issues or discuss if they had any problems or wanted to present their pull requests. And I'll say it was mentioned earlier, even though we've dedicated this week, if people aren't done, we do want to encourage working on it like over the weekend or next week or until it's complete, and we still will be around to ask questions or to help you through the issues. It doesn't have to be a this week or nothing job. And as mentioned, Nitesh mentioned too, we're hoping to do more of these and get more community involvement. So don't think of it as this was it, and if I don't get it done, it won't happen. Because we really do want you guys to contribute and get your pull requests in. So.
I'd like to add one more thing. Just if you guys can think about feedback on how we can potentially improve this for the next time. I guess concrete steps which will improve a hackathon like this, potentially online for the foreseeable future, right? So we're open to feedback. Yeah.
Great. So thanks very much, everybody. Thanks, Martin, for guiding us through with your shared screen. Hopefully we'll resolve that for future sessions. And see everybody tomorrow afternoon or morning, whatever it is in your time zone. Bye, guys.
Yeah.
Bye.